So as these slides come up, I should say that, there it is. Some of this work is also being submitted as evidence for the various select committees that are happening in the UK, so I'm based in the UK. And I should also say that this work that I'm presenting today was done with Claire Wardle from First Draft and our PhD student, Hannah. So where I want to start is to just give a kind of a quick premise. One is that images are incredibly powerful. I think we know that, but I think they don't necessarily get the standalone attention when it comes to mis and disinformation that we feel that they deserve. As vehicles, potential vehicles for dis and misinformation, they're incredibly complex to understand, but potentially very harmful, which is why we feel that they need standalone attention. Haroon mentioned in the previous panel a language-based model. I would add to that, below that, a visual-based model. If you start to think about how people understand images, then I think you are dealing with something even more complex. So if we go to the next slide. Where do I press?
The green button?
Green button.
Oh.
Other side.
Oh, there. I'm pressing, okay. Thank you. I'm used to the TED format. Okay, so everybody I'm sure has seen this image. I think this is a really good example of an image making visible a very complex social issue that potentially in text-based form people knew about, but it is the image that made a difference in terms of people trying to understand what was going on and putting pressure on a government to change a policy. And I would say that this image had an impact overnight. An image from the UK, we are of course also dealing with state-based official actors actively misleading, and I think that's really important. So we're not, as a sort of baseline, dealing with foreign states trying to meddle. We are also dealing with official state actors misinforming the populace. And so what we have here is this is UK politician Nigel Farage. This is in the lead up to the EU referendum, where very misleading information around what the influx potentially of migrants and refugees, so this is at the height of the refugee crisis or the visible refugee crisis, and tapping into those fears and tapping into very powerful images, produced this breaking point poster, which in retrospect you can say contributed significantly to the outcome of that vote. This is an image that came about in the aftermath of the Westminster bombing. So this is in March 2017. This is a false image that was shared and went viral in the aftermath, where people were basically saying that Londoners had a particular response to the Westminster attack. This was also read out in Parliament. This was entirely false. This was generated online, and so we have an example here of a UK state actor being misled, in this case the Prime Minister, and it was shared also by many official news sources. So a number of different kinds of images that are potentially misleading, problematic, and different actors spreading these. So what tends to happen is that organizations like BuzzFeed, they do a lot of really, really good work in this space. Very quickly, when an event has happened, often in the aftermath of a terrorism attack, they will put out, and others like BuzzFeed, they will put out lists of examples of false or misleading images, memes, and so on. And so the tube example was included in this list of 7 images that were potentially misleading and harmful, but the next one wasn't. And I would say that this has been the most harmful. Are people in the room familiar with this image? This is also in the aftermath of the Westminster attack. This is a true image. This is unaltered. This is showing a person, a victim in the background, and a Muslim woman, Muslima, in the foreground, turning away and walking past. And there's different iterations of this image. And the way in which this was presented online, it went viral, was, look, this is what the problem is. The Muslims are attacking us. The perpetrator of the Westminster attack was a convert to Islam, and also they don't care. Right, so in terms of what Renee already said in the past panel, these are the kinds of images that press the emotional buttons. So this was happening in March, but what we didn't find out until November as part of the congressional hearings in the US, and Dean highlighted the work that he's done on the list of accounts that were suspended from Twitter. UK researchers had a look at this as well and identified Texas Lone Star as an account that was linked to IRA, and this image was one of this account's kind of big triumphs, because this went viral and it was picked up in over 80 mainstream newspaper articles. So what we have here is we have a very successful disinformation campaign that was picked up by the mainstream media and legitimized by the mainstream media. And of course the damage is done because this image is still out there, and this kind of dominant framing, if you like, of the Muslims are the problem is of course out there, even though the debunk is also out there. So what we decided to do is to try and look at the role of images and mis- and disinformation in two big European elections, the French and UK elections last year. So what we looked at is First Draft partnered in both countries with different partners. So in France, they set up a project called Crosscheck, which worked with different newsrooms and journalism students and pulled information from a number of different sources. And they then produced all of this information, 43, in this case, image-based misleading items on a website, and we then built a database on top of that. And in the UK case, And in the UK case, they worked with Full Fact, very similar, although pulled in information from a number of different sources, so there are slight differences. And the difference here also is that that information was shared with newsrooms in the form of newsletters. So that was closed information, if you like, and in the French case, everything was publicly available on a website, and in the UK case, this was in the form of newsletters. So there's also two different models at work here. So what we then did, when we took all of that information from these two sources, we ended up with 95 image mini case studies, if you like, 52 from the UK case and 43 from the French case. And we coded that then in a number of different ways. In terms of image types, for example, because we're academics, we identified 21 different image types. We think it's very, very important to be very precise in terms of potential signals for disinformation when it comes to images. So we have 21 types, so we might get rid of a few of them. We also worked with First Draft's original model for levels of accuracy. We coded for the topic, we coded for motivation, we coded for origin, so the source, the location, and also I mentioned the source. So many of you will be familiar with the typology that First Draft put out, that Claire put out, and that typology went viral. And we added 3 to that, specifically tailored to images. And so altogether, we ended up with 10 and technically 12, because we also opened up the possibility that the images are accurate, and just accurate and humorous. So technically, we have 12. So we've expanded this typology to specifically be able to deal with visual content here. Now, just to give you very briefly some insight here in terms of what we're interested in terms of trying to understand what are potential signals when it comes to images. So that what we see is that predominantly when we look at image types, and I haven't given you the full findings here for the 21 types, but these are the most dominantly used ones. We have dominantly video, photographs, data visualization, photographs with text, screenshots of tweets, and also I just want to pull out memes, because there seems to be a lot of work that focuses specifically on memes. So there seem to be a lot of meme trackers that get funded, but when you look at the data, so when you try to understand what is the actual problem, what does the actual problem look like, rather than let's look at a very specific content type, memes seem to be relatively small compared to photographs. If we look at the level of accuracy, the biggest problem is false context. So in both cases, both in the French case and the UK case, on average, we have 30% of the problematic content is a truthful image. I'm just going to let that hang in the air a little bit. And it's the context that is the problem. So these are not things that you can you can easily deal with in terms of machine learning, in terms of algorithms. So this is an example of a false context image. This is an image that shows, in the French case, the aftermath of a football match where people went out to celebrate and someone is draped in what looks like an ISIS flag. It is not an ISIS flag, but in the run-up to the French elections, this image is dredged up, represented as if it's an ISIS flag and as if it's an ISIS supporter to press that button in terms of Islamophobia in the French context. And just to wrap up, there are efforts, and Facebook is making efforts, in this case I'm focusing just on Facebook, to start to look at the fact-checking efforts in terms of images, and the false context is being highlighted there, and I'm sure this is in part related to earlier presentations that Claire has made on this work to this company and others. But I think what is really, really important to understand is that there are no straightforward technological solutions here. Because if you think that it's the context of the way in which the image is presented that is the problem, that can be different every single time. And I think when we're dealing with images, I still feel that we're still at the stage of mapping out what the problem is and how complex that problem is. And if people want to talk to me more afterwards or in the Q&A, I have a lot more to say about it. Also in terms of the kinds of visuals, so very, very problematic infographics that are incredibly hard to debunk. So when it comes to visuals, I think we need standalone efforts to try and understand what they contribute to this space. Thank you.